Wow. Thank you so much for the great introduction, and thank you so much for staying so late till 9 p.m. for me. Well, my name is Tina, and I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to stand on the stage today to give this speech. So let's just get right into it. So I'm sure many of you have seen these trendy videos online, right? If you want to be a millionaire, do this, or 10 side hustles to make your life better. Well, for me, growing up, hustle isn't just a trend on TikTok. For me, growing up, hustle was my whole life. In secondary and high school, I was in specialized schools where getting in meant years of extra classes and weekends, tutoring, and exam papers that's higher than my own height. I was in class A of foreign language specialized school, the class that required the highest score to get in, and I was surrounded by some of the most competitive students that you can imagine. My default speed of life was faster, and my default standard of life was higher, and my life's motto was that if I wasn't running, then I wasn't enough. So I carried on that same engine onto my adulthood, as you can imagine. I went on to get not one, but 2 bachelor degrees in the United States, and just last month, I just got back from my 2nd master degree from NUS, the top 1 university from all of Asia, right? And not only so, while doing all of this, I was building a channel and I was maintaining a small business on the side. And my life truly, it looks like the ultimate hustle culture highlight reel, right? Prestige schools and multiple degrees and a growing audience, a small business. But somehow there's this question that kept sticking with me, right? If I've done everything that hustle culture told me to do, why don't I feel the way that I thought success would feel? So let's circle back to the origin of hustle culture. What exactly is it? So according to the Ministry of Labor of Indonesia, hustle culture is a standard in society that considers success only achievable if you dedicate your life to work. This culture puts work over all health and personal life. And hustle culture isn't just working hard, right? It's the belief system that tells you that your worth is tied to productivity, that rest is kind of suspicious, and that if you're not constantly on the move, then you're falling behind. Research on mental health have shown that long working hours and constant pressure to show up are linked to increasing levels of stress, anxiety, depression, and poor sleep. Over time, you don't just give yourself to work anymore. You start to slowly hand over your sense of self. You stop asking questions like, am I living well? And you start asking questions like, am I doing enough? And in a culture that worships hustle, the answer is always no. So when I look back at my life, right, I see a very clear pattern. I see, specialized schools in Vietnam where everyone is just chasing the next goals and preparing for the next exam, right? 2 bachelor degrees in the US in an environment where it's just normal to overwhelm yourself because everybody is doing so. A 2nd master degree at NUS, a highly competitive program where it's just normal to have such high pressure. It's sky high. Building a TikTok channel, being a content creator and a small business, all of this looks like a CV that hustle culture would be very proud of, the perfect hustle culture CV. But internally for me, it also meant that I knew my deadlines better than my own emotional state, that I had strategies for growth, but definitely not for rest, and that I was surrounded by people, but I was so tired to truly connect. At the end of the day, I realized that I was so good at building a life that looks very impressive, but definitely not a life that felt sustainable. A few months ago, I had a talk with a friend, and she reminded me of this Harvard happiness study, right? It is actually the longest study on happiness in the world, and since 1938, researchers have studied hundreds of men and later on their spouses and their children, tracking their everything, their activities, their habits, their relationships, to eventually get the answer to this one question: what creates a happy life? And if hustle culture wrote this script, you would have expected that the happiest people are the people with the best career, with the most money and the longest list of achievement, right? But that is not what the study found. Robert Waldinger said that warm, good, reliable relationships are some of the best predictors of both happiness and longer life. The data shows that people who are more socially connected to family, friends, and community are happier, physically healthier, and live longer. And those who are more isolated have worse health, faster cognitive decline, and shorter lives. So the idea from this research really stuck with me, right? So quality relationships are what determines a quality life. But that is not what my multiple degrees or hustle culture ever framed success for me. But the perspective that actually truly stayed with me came from a hospital ward. This is Bronnie Ware. She's an Australian care nurse that spent 8 years of her life in the hospital caring for the people at their final stage of life. And oftentimes she'd go around and she asked these people about their biggest regrets, right? And over time she heard the same answers over and over so much that she consolidated them and wrote a book about it that is called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And what people regretted most, it wasn't that I wish I'd answered more emails, right? It wasn't that I wish I'd gotten another degree. And it definitely wasn't I wish I hustled harder. The top 5 regrets of the dying are this: I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings, and I wish I had let myself be happier. If the Harvard study gave us over 80 years of data, Bronnie's story gave us something just as powerful: the unfiltered truth of people looking back at their lives when there is no time left to pretend. And together they paint a very clear message that people almost never regret not hustling more, but they often regret not living more, not loving more, and not resting more. So when I put these lessons right next to the trajectory of my life, I had an uncomfortable realization. I realized that I was optimizing for the wrong things. Hustle culture had taught me to optimize for external metrics. And they are institutions, titles, follower counts, money, right? But these lessons, the Harvard study or the words of the people on their final days are telling me something completely different: to optimize for internal and relational metrics. And those are authenticity, connection, and joy. The message here isn't that work is bad or ambition is wrong. The message here is that if you prioritize hustle over your relationships, then the bill will eventually arrive, and it will be paid in loneliness, burnout, and regret. So how am I trying to live differently? For me, it started with a quiet decision to redefine what hustle means. For most of my life, hustle meant intensity, output, and constant motion, but now I'm trying to let it mean something slower and more sustainable, something like discipline but with kindness, and effort without self-erasure. I'm still ambitious, but I do not want to measure my growth by the milestones that I've achieved, but maybe by how calmly I can move through them. And this means working with intention right? Not just momentum. Valuing recovery as part of progress, not its opposite. And treating relationships, rest and joy as legitimate forms of success. What does it mean practically? Protecting time for the people I love with the same seriousness I give to deadlines. Allowing myself days where doing less is not a failure, but a form of maintenance. And reframing busyness as a signal to pause and not prove of worth. And it also means asking myself different kinds of questions, not how far can I go before I burn out, but how can I go far without burning out? Not how much can I do, but what truly deserves my energy. Redefining hustle isn't against working hard, right? It just is remembering that life is not about working harder, but it's about living better. This is definitely not a speech against ambition. Many of us do not have the luxury to opt out of working hard, but maybe we can all agree that a packed schedule is not the same as a meaningful life, and we can agree that a list of elite schools is not the same as a heart at peace, and we can all agree that a long resume is not the same as a life with a few regrets. Because if the Harvard study and the words of the people on their final days converge on one truth, it is this: what will matter most is not how efficiently you hustled, but how deeply you connected, how honestly you lived, and how fully you allowed yourself to be human. So, you are invited. Here's the invitation, right? For all of us that grew up in a society that tells you that your worth is tied to your output, let us ask different kinds of questions. Let us ask questions like, if I slow down just a little, what do I finally have space to feel? If I prioritize one relationship this month, which one would change my life the most? And if one day I'm that person in the hospital bed, what do I want to not regret, right? Because ultimately, the ultimate achievement is not surviving hustle culture. The ultimate achievement is designing a life that your future self will thank you for. A life that balances ambition with connection, productivity with presence, and success with very few regrets. Thank you.